Coming up in this video, I'll show you how I paint a human monk from the Deep Cuts line from WizKids. Hey everyone, welcome back to Mini Junkie. My name is Jarrett. So in the latest of our Dungeons & Dragons / Pathfinder painting series, I painted up a human monk. I've read that monks are pretty popular characters, so I thought I should try my hand at one. Now in this case, I did a pretty fast job. Like I know a lot of these I'm doing, techniques with inks and with glazes and whatnot, cutting corners effectively to try and get a quick and nice looking result. In this case, I definitely feel like I push that as far as I can, and it's pretty fast, but I think it still looks really cool. And what I'm wondering is, let me know below, actually two things. The other thing is I've changed how I'm filming the painting portion of my tutorial, so I'm using actually my iPhone, which is kind of amazing to me that the quality's decent. But let me know if the quality's decent and if you think it looks good, or as compared to some of the other videos I've done, and if I should keep using that. But the other thing I'm wondering is, would you like to continue seeing the Nolzer / Deep Cuts figures painted in this sort of quick technique method, so that you can sort of crank out some nice characters and monsters and stuff in a fairly easy fashion? Or would you like to see me spend more time on some of them where I'm actually using real paints and highlighting and shading and whatnot to do nicer looking paint jobs and show you sort of more advanced techniques? There's kind of the two ways you can do it. I'm having fun finding the shortcuts and doing them quickly, but maybe you guys are interested in seeing something higher quality. I don't know. So let me know down below. Don't let me down. So with all that said, let's get to the painting table and we'll paint up this monk. All right, here's a look at the monk. I think this is the lower level monk of the package that comes with two of them. The first thing I did is this flesh, and I used game color ink, yellow and brown, and I mixed them together. I think it was like 5 drops brown to 2 drops yellow. I was just trying to go for like a bit of a golden tone to his skin. I don't want to say yellow skin, but not just sort of like a really pale. So and I'm actually really pretty pleased with the final result, how it turned out. It looks a lot darker going on, but once it dries and gets matte varnished, it looks pretty good. When you apply it to his head, you want to because he's bald, you want to make sure you're not going to get little sort of dark spots on top of his head. So just wick that off with your brush, and you may have to spend some time working on that so that it doesn't end up blotchy. As always with these inks, you want to work fairly quickly and accurately with it. You don't want to sort of slosh it outside the line, so to speak. And if you go too slow, you could end up with some overlapping marks. So you have to move quickly while it's wet. I decided I wanted his what is that, combat skirt, whatever it is, to be bright and colorful so that he wasn't too plain of a miniature. I'm going for orange, and we're going to underpaint that with yellow first, and just use yellow ink and allow it to dry. Conversely, I decided to keep his pants fairly plain. Just using Seraphim Sepia would be a little bit light, and so I do mix in just like a drop or two of sepia ink. Now in this coat, you can't actually see the sepia doing much work, so I do come back later and go over with a second coat after this is dry to make sure it's darker. To complement the orange we're going to be using, I decided to use Vallejo Game Ink Blue on the 2 panel cloths that are hanging down, and then also as the trim around the skirt, around the sort of bottom and front edge, just right out of the bottle as always. As much as these inks do create a nice effect very quickly, they're also going to be unforgiving if you make mistakes, so you do want to take your time, make sure you stay precise and keep it neat as you're painting it on. Like, you wouldn't want to get the blue on the yellow here. I also paint, I don't know if I show it here, but I paint that necklace he's wearing, or choker, with the blue as well. Some of you know this is one of my go-tos, sepia ink from Vallejo, and I'm just using it, painting it along the leather strap that goes all the way around his torso. I do this once, and then later on I'm going to do it again just to make it a little darker, make it stand out against the skin. You can't see what this is, but it's GW Gilliman Blue. It's a glaze that's a fairly faint glaze, so I wanted him to have light blue sort of slippers. Don't ask me why, but I took, I think, 2 coats of this to make them look right, so you want to let it dry between coats. Another go-to is Fugan Orange Shade from GW. We're painting this right out of the bottle, right over that yellow. Of course, you will have made sure that the yellow is dry before you do this. And so what happens is the yellow comes through as a nice highlight on the folds of the skirt, and the orange tints it and creates shading in the folds. For the cloth and, I don't know, belt area, it's really hard to describe this guy's clothes and armor, but I wanted kind of like a light tan, so I went with Seraphim Sepia, although in the end I have to do a lot of different work on this to make it look right, so this step is almost covered up. I used scale 75 Dwarven Gold on the bracers, and eventually, also on the belt buckle thing on the strap on his chest, and eventually also around effectively the metallic looking area of his belt. You can use any gold you want for this step. Here's that second coat of sepia ink on the strap across his chest, just to darken it up. Paint the whole base with Mechanicus Standard Gray as always from GW. I use this on most of my Nulzur's miniatures so far, or Deep Cuts miniatures. I wanted the recessed panels of his waist armor to be black, and I mean, you could do this with black paint for sure, just thin it down. I used black ink. I was making kind of a mess, so there's a lot of time I had to spend going back and forth, sort of trying to neaten it up, and also to sort of clean up some of the edging with lighter color, like I think I used a Karak stone at some point. Second coat of Fugan Orange on the skirt so that it's nice and rich orange. On the necklace, I decided for each ball I wanted to highlight it a bit, so I'm using a Vallejo Game Color Electric Blue. You could use any light blue you want, and it just shows you can add highlights wherever you like if you want to continue to add detail and richness. It's a little bit hard to make out the detail on the scabbards of his 2 dagger thingies. I don't know, it's hard to tell where they start and end, so I used Doom Bull Brown. You could use any medium brown you like. I mentioned this earlier, but I started to do some cleanup with Karak stone from GW along sort of the raised edging of that front armor to try and keep the black looking crisp in the recessed parts. This is probably the most challenging element of this miniature to paint. I did want the cloth that runs around his waist, almost like to hold his weapons on, to be standing out differently, so I used Rakarth Flesh from GW as a first highlight. Back to the edges, I used a Shabti Bone just to pick out some of the slightly raised sections of these edges, or where there's almost like a corner. I don't show it here, but I dry brushed the base first with Dawnstone, and after that dried with Administratum Grey. Back to the cloth belt, used GW Pallid Witch Flesh, which is quite a light color. It's kind of an off-white. Just very carefully drew in some highlight lines along the cloth, and make sure that's thinned down a little bit with some water or some thinner medium. Now for the eyes, I carefully first paint in the eyeball with Menoth White Highlight. Brace your hands against each other and very slowly and carefully paint them in, and hold your breath when you do this. To give some shading to the base, I slapped on a wash of Agrax Earth Shade just on the texture part, not on the rock. Next up is the pupils. I used Vallejo Game Ink Black. I'm not sure why, I just decided to use ink this time. I'm always experimenting. Once again, brace your hands very carefully against each other, hold your breath, and just take your time. Paint it in very slowly and carefully. And if you're wearing drugstore magnifying glasses like I am, that helps a lot. I also used the black ink to do some black lining on this miniature. It gives it, I want to say, almost like a comic book level of separation to each area, so you can do it between the belt and the torso, or the belt and the skirt along the back. And you just want to be careful and go slowly, and it just looks nice. A critical step when you're using these inks to do this speed painting style is to do a matte varnish to take all of that shine away, so it looks much better it looks a lot better once the matte varnish is applied. Now I come in with Agrax Earthshade Gloss to bring some shine back to those metallics, specifically the gold, so the bracers and the belt. Not sure if you could see it in the video, but he had 2 black spots or sort of dark spots on his back, so I used Best to Gore Flesh from GW to cover those up, and it was actually a really good match for this ink-based flesh tone I came up with. I added a little bit of detail using P3 Radiant Platinum to the gold. It's quite silvery, so that's going to stand out quite a bit. So this step I would say is optional. You don't have to do this, and I'm not even sure if I love it, but it's something you can try if you want. Here's the finished monk. I like how he turned out. Like I said, this is one of the fastest ones I've done, and certainly it's cuts a lot of corners. So let me know, like I said, in the comments below if you want to see me spend more time or continue to do these sort of shortcut tips and tricks type speed painting videos for nulzers and deep cuts. Hope you found this interesting. Consider hitting that like button if you did. I'm really enjoying painting these nulzers and deep cuts miniatures, so I'll definitely be doing more. We'll see you next time. Thanks.